Beneath the surface of the internet, beyond the websites you know, lies a hidden realm, a place where the darkest fantasies are brought to life. Here, in the shadowy corridors of the dark web, anonymity grants the freedom to explore the unthinkable. It was in this place that two men met and struck a deadly bargain. On a website known as the Cannibal Cafe, a man named Armin Meiwes advertised for something unthinkable, a willing victim to be slaughtered and consumed, and to the horror of the world, someone answered the call. What began as an online fantasy quickly became a nightmare of flesh and blood. Together, they sealed their pact in a farmhouse kitchen, a pact that would lead to one man's death and another's lifelong imprisonment. But the true horror lies not only in the crime itself, but in the chilling questions it raised. Can a man truly consent to his own slaughter? And does that consent make the crime any less monstrous? This is the true story of the Cannibal Cafe case, a descent into the darkest depths of human depravity. And once you hear it, you'll never be able to forget it. The screen glowed faintly in the dark, casting a pale, bluish light onto Markus Fischer's face. His small apartment was engulfed in shadows, with only the soft hum of his desktop computer breaking the silence. A single candle flickered weakly on the desk, its wax pooling into a messy puddle, forgotten hours ago. Markus's eyes were glued to the monitor, his pupils dilated with a disturbing fascination. The Tor browser window flickered as he navigated through layers of encrypted anonymity, clicking through hidden forums with meaningless names: Obscura, Meat Market, The Raven's Den. The text was written in cryptic, code-like language, unintelligible to the casual observer, but Markus had spent years perfecting his navigation of the dark web. Tonight was different. Tonight, he was searching for something he had only fantasized about. He found it. The link was simple, but chilling. The Cannibal Cafe, a forum for enthusiasts of culinary curiosities. His heart rate spiked slightly. His fingers trembled as he moved the mouse cursor over the link, hesitating for a brief moment before clicking. The page loaded slowly, as if mocking his anticipation. The banner displayed a plain, minimalist logo, two overlapping steak knives crossed over a silver plate. Below it, the words, "Meat Lovers Welcome," were written in a script font. But it wasn't beef they were discussing. He scrolled through the forum threads, eyes widening slightly. The usernames were cryptic, their profile pictures faceless avatars or random stock images. Lust for flesh. Anyone in Europe open to meat? Looking for the real thing. Meat Seeker 88. I'm prepared to sell a limb if anyone's interested. DM only. Chef Ramsay. Ready for a real meal. Send requests. Pics available upon confirmation. Markus felt the bile rise in his throat, but he swallowed it down with grim determination. His hands trembled slightly on the keyboard. He had read about this place before. Rumors of people, real people, meeting strangers online to act out their darkest desires. He had once dismissed it as urban legend or some twisted internet hoax. But the posts were explicit, disturbingly specific. He clicked on a recent thread. Seeking willing flesh, Germany only. The original poster was a man called Frankie, 1978. The message was simple and direct. Seeking a willing participant. Willingness is mandatory. No pain, only pleasure. DM if serious. Let's make dreams come true. Markus's fingers hovered over the keyboard. His mouth was dry. His temples throbbed. And then, he typed. The exchange was disturbingly easy. Markus's message was brief but specific. I am serious. I'm willing to meet. I want this. No limits. No safe word. I am ready to be consumed. He hesitated before sending it, his hands cold and clammy against the keyboard. When he finally clicked send, he let out a sharp breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Seconds later, a message notification appeared. Frankie, 1978. You are serious? Markus's hands shook slightly as he typed back. Yes. There was a long pause, then another message. I will only meet with genuine volunteers. If you are having second thoughts, leave now. Markus inhaled deeply, steeling himself. No second thoughts. I want this. I've wanted this for years. Another message appeared. Where are you? He swallowed hard, then typed, Essen, Germany. The reply came fast. I am 2 hours away. We can meet. I want to savor you slowly. I have the perfect place. Markus's chest tightened with a bizarre mix of fear and excitement. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. When? The answer was immediate. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. I will pick you up. No turning back. Markus stared at the screen, his heart pounding so violently it echoed in his ears. The conversation was brief, disturbingly simple. Too simple. As he stared at the screen, he slowly realized what he had done. That night, Markus barely slept. His dreams were filled with fragmented images, raw meat sizzling on a grill, red wine pooling in a glass. But in his dream, it was not wine. It was thick, arterial blood. He woke with a jolt, drenched in sweat. His bedsheets were tangled, twisted around his legs like restraints. His mouth was dry, and his hands were trembling slightly. But the dark craving still lingered. Throughout the day, he remained in a trance, moving through his apartment like a ghost. He paced the living room, biting his nails until his fingertips bled. His mind kept replaying the message thread. He considered canceling the meeting, blocking the user, or simply disappearing. But he didn't. Instead, he opened his wardrobe and carefully selected his clothing, a plain gray t-shirt, jeans, and a brown jacket. His old hiking boots, sturdy but comfortable. It felt like preparing for a date. He shaved carefully, combed his hair back, and even splashed on a faint cologne, but he barely recognized the face in the mirror. His eyes were hollow, dark circles forming underneath. He looked as though he were already fading. At exactly 9:55 a.m., Markus stepped outside his apartment. The cold air bit at his face, making him shiver. He squinted at the cloud-covered sky, unsure if he felt relief or dread. A black sedan pulled up at the corner. The windows were tinted, and Markus couldn't see the driver. The car idled for a moment, its engine humming softly. Markus's feet felt heavy, his legs sluggish. His instinct was screaming at him to turn around, to run back into the apartment and forget everything. But his body disobeyed him. His legs carried him forward, his boots scuffing against the cracked pavement. As he approached, the passenger window rolled down. The man behind the wheel was surprisingly ordinary. Frankie 1978, whose real name was Armin Meiwes, looked unremarkable. He wore thin, wire-rimmed glasses and had thinning blonde hair. His smile was disturbingly warm, even friendly. "Markus?" Meiwes asked, his voice calm, almost cheerful. Markus nodded slowly. Meiwes gestured to the passenger seat. "Get in. We have a lot to discuss." Markus slid into the car, the door closing with a quiet but decisive click. The sedan rolled forward, disappearing down the quiet, gray streets of Essen. The drive was eerily silent. save for the occasional mutter of a car engine passing in the opposite direction. Markus stared out the window, watching the cityscape gradually dissolve into rolling countryside. The buildings grew sparser, replaced by dense clusters of trees and narrow country roads. Meiwes didn't speak much. He occasionally glanced at Markus and smiled, but his eyes were calculating, watching him with mild curiosity, like a butcher appraising a fine cut of meat. After an hour, they pulled off the road onto a gravel driveway. Ahead of them was a 2-story farmhouse, weathered but quaint. The wooden shutters were faded and the roof sagged slightly, as though exhausted by time. Meiwes parked the car and turned to Markus. "We're here," he said softly. His voice was gentle, almost soothing. Marcus's mouth was dry, his hands were shaking. He stepped out of the car, and as he stared at the isolated farmhouse, he felt a sharp pang of dread rise in his chest. But it was too late to turn back. The invitation had been accepted. The gravel crunched beneath Marcus's boots as he followed Armin Meiwes toward the farmhouse. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, and the distant hum of the wind through the trees seemed almost too peaceful for what awaited inside. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath, anticipating the madness that was about to unfold. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, each beat like the tick of a clock counting down to something he could no longer avoid. His body felt strangely numb, as though he were moving through a dream. He had wanted this, desired it, but now that it was here, the reality of what he had agreed to was almost too much to bear. Meiwes's movements were smooth and deliberate, his hands casually slipping into his jacket pocket as he unlocked the door to the farmhouse. His demeanor was unsettlingly calm, as though this was all just part of a normal routine. His face was polite, even cordial, and there was a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. He glanced back at Markus with an almost inviting look, as if to reassure him. "After you," Meiwes said, holding the door open. Markus stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking beneath his weight. The interior of the farmhouse was dimly lit, the only light coming from a few scattered lamps casting long shadows against the walls. The furniture was sparse, an old wooden dining table, a few mismatched chairs, and an antique cabinet in the corner. It felt eerily quiet, like the house was holding a dark secret, one it had been keeping for far too long. Markus hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the room. There was nothing to suggest anything unusual, nothing except the oppressive sense of dread that hung in the air, thick as smoke. "Make yourself comfortable," Meiwes said, his voice soft but firm. He moved to the table and began to adjust some items there, various tools and utensils, though Markus couldn't quite make them out yet. "I'll get us something to drink." Markus didn't move. His legs felt like lead, but he managed to shuffle toward one of the chairs. He sat down slowly, his eyes never leaving Meiwes. This was it, the moment he had been anticipating yet dreading all at once. Meiwes returned with 2 glasses of water, setting one in front of Markus before taking a seat across from him. He didn't speak right away, simply watched Markus with those unsettlingly calm eyes. It was as if he were waiting for something, some sign, some hesitation from Markus that would change everything. But Markus said nothing. He couldn't. The silence stretched on, broken only by the quiet hum of the farmhouse, the rustle of leaves outside, and the occasional creak of wood. It felt like a prison, with no escape but the one he had willingly chosen. "Are you nervous?" Meiwes asked after a long pause, his voice gentle, almost sympathetic. Markus swallowed, the water in front of him suddenly feeling too close. His throat was dry, his stomach twisting in knots. I'm not sure what I'm feeling, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Meiwes smiled. It was not a kind smile, but one of understanding, like a man who had seen this many times before. It's normal, he said. I'll walk you through everything. No rush. No need to be scared. Markus nodded numbly, trying to focus on the glass of water before him. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, but the words felt trapped in his chest, too heavy to escape. Instead, he let the silence settle between them, hoping it would somehow make this more bearable. After a moment of stillness, Meiwes stood up and walked to the far side of the room where a wooden cabinet stood. He opened it slowly, as if giving Markus time to see what was inside. The dim light flickered, casting eerie shadows over the objects he retrieved. First came a knife, long and gleaming, its blade reflecting the faint light in a way that made Markus's stomach churn. It was clearly well-maintained, sharp, and heavy. Meiwes placed it gently on the table, his fingers caressing the handle as though it were a cherished possession. Next came a pair of scissors, large and industrial-looking. They clinked against the table as they were set down, the sound sharp and unsettling. Meiwes adjusted them carefully, as if testing their weight. Markus's heart skipped a beat as his eyes darted from the knife to the scissors. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and he suddenly realized the extent of what was about to happen. Meiwes turned back to him, his expression unchanged. He didn't need to say anything. Markus already understood. "These," Meiwes said, his voice calm, "are for the preparation." Meiwes moved with practiced ease, his actions smooth and deliberate. It was as if this was something he had done many times before, a routine, a ritual that held no more significance than making a meal. The detachment in his movements was chilling. "Would you like to begin?" Meiwes asked, his tone polite but expectant. Markus didn't answer right away. His hands were trembling, his mind racing. This was no longer a fantasy, no longer an abstract thrill from a Darkweb forum. This was real. He was sitting in a farmhouse, facing the man who would soon act on the promise made in that online message. The man who would fulfill the ultimate desire. Yes, Markus stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm ready." Meiwes nodded, satisfied with the answer. He gestured for Markus to stand. "The first step," Meiwes said softly, "is trust. And you've already shown me that by coming this far." Markus stood slowly, his body stiff, unwilling to betray the fear that gripped his chest. Meiwes didn't seem to notice. He was already preparing something else, an incision kit, sterile and neatly arranged in a tray. The soft clicking of metal tools as they were arranged on the table echoed through the room. Markus's breath came in shallow gasps. He felt a wave of dizziness wash over him, but he couldn't leave now. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. "Trust me, Markus," Meiwes said, his voice low. "This will be over before you know it. And then we will feast." Just as Meiwes moved toward him, Markus felt a sudden sharp pang of fear. It wasn't just the fear of pain or death, it was the fear of finality. In that moment, the gravity of the situation hit him all at once. What had he been thinking? What had driven him to this point? He recoiled, taking a step back. His chest heaved as he fought to catch his breath, his mind a whirl of panic. I can't," he whispered, the words tumbling from his lips before he could stop them. I can't do this. Meiwes stopped, his face unreadable. There was no anger, no frustration, only a quiet, almost clinical understanding. He didn't press Markus further, merely observing him in silence. Are you sure? Meiwes asked, his voice soft, almost coaxing. Markus's heart was pounding in his chest. His body trembled uncontrollably. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape, to go home and pretend none of this had ever happened. But it was too late. I'm sorry, Markus whispered, shaking his head. I can't do this. Meiwes's eyes darkened, but his smile remained in place. It was no longer warm or friendly. It was cold, clinical, calculating, the smile of a predator. Well then, Meiwes said, his voice turning sharp. It's a shame. Before Markus could react, Meiwes closed the distance between them with a speed that was almost too fast for him to register. His hand shot out, gripping Markus's wrist with startling strength. Markus tried to pull away, but it was too late. Meiwes's other hand held the gleaming knife, and the edge of the blade pressed against Markus's neck. Trust me, Meiwes whispered again, his breath hot on Markus's ear. You wanted this. You asked for this. Markus's world went dark. He felt the cold steel against his skin, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood the weight of his decision. The farmhouse was silent, save for the occasional creak of old wood and the distant howling of wind outside. The dim lighting cast elongated shadows on the walls, flickering with the uncertainty of what was about to unfold. Markus sat at the table, his fingers twitching against the grain of the wood, his breath shallow and uneven. Meiwes moved methodically, clearing the surface before him with practiced ease. His hands, steady and precise, arranged the tools with the kind of care a chef might show when preparing a delicate meal. The contrast between the banality of the act and the horror of its purpose made Markus's stomach churn. For the first time since he'd arrived, fear gripped him in its entirety. This was not a fantasy, not some thrill-seeking indulgence facilitated by the anonymity of the dark web. This was real, and it was happening now. Meiwes turned to Markus, his expression unreadable. There's still time to change your mind, he said, almost gently. Markus swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had wanted this, had fantasized about it for so long that it had consumed him. But now, in the dim glow of the farmhouse, the weight of his decision pressed upon him like a crushing force. Yet, despite his fear, he gave a weak nod. I'm ready. Meiwes smiled, a slow, deliberate motion that never quite reached his eyes. He moved to the cabinet and retrieved a small vial, holding it up to the light. Mild sedative, he explained, to dull the pain, to make it easier. Markus's fingers trembled as he reached for the vial. He downed it in one swallow, the bitter liquid burning his throat. Almost immediately a haze settled over him, dulling the sharp edges of his fear. His limbs felt heavy, his thoughts slow. That's it, Meiwes said soothingly. Just relax. Markus's vision blurred at the edges as Meiwes gently guided him to a reclining chair in the center of the room. The scent of old wood and iron filled his nostrils. He could feel the warmth of Meiwes's hands against his skin, the careful way he positioned him. The last thing Markus saw before his vision darkened was the gleam of the knife in Meiwes's hand. The farmhouse had changed. The stillness had given way to something darker, something oppressive. The air was thick with a metallic scent, one that clung to the walls and the floorboards, soaking into the very fabric of the room. Meiwes moved about the kitchen, his demeanor unchanged, The same careful precision, the same quiet efficiency. He hummed softly under his breath as he worked, the sound barely audible over the rhythmic chopping of the knife against the cutting board. He had prepared everything perfectly. The table was set with the finest china he owned, the silverware polished to a pristine gleam. He had even lit candles, their golden glow flickering against the surface of the dishes. He had waited for this moment for so long. Sliding the pan onto the stove, Meiwes watched as the oil sizzled, filling the air with the scent of searing flesh. He seasoned the meat carefully, just as he had always imagined, just as he had meticulously planned. This was not an act of cruelty. This was a communion, a joining of two souls in the most intimate way possible. Meiwes sat at the table, the plate before him steaming. He took a deep breath, savoring the moment before cutting the first bite. He chewed slowly, deliberately, letting the taste settle on his tongue. A tear slipped down his cheek. It was everything he had dreamed, everything he had longed for. And as he swallowed, he closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Markus." Outside, the wind howled against the walls of the farmhouse, carrying the secret of what had transpired within its aged wooden frame into the vast, unknowing darkness. The farmhouse was silent when the officers arrived. The wind tugged at the skeletal branches of the trees surrounding the property, making them rattle like brittle bones. The sky was a smear of gray, bloated with heavy clouds threatening rain. Detective Claudia Reinhold climbed out of her unmarked sedan, boots crunching on the gravel driveway. She paused, taking in the scene, a quaint, rustic house, its white paint faded and peeling. From the outside, it appeared no different from the dozens of other farmhouses scattered across the German countryside. But Claudia knew better. She had seen the forums, read the reports. The tip they had received, a barely coherent message from a terrified online user, had led them here. She adjusted the gloves on her hands, nodding toward her partner, Detective Klaus Berger. With a curt nod, he moved toward the front door, flanking her. The two officers standing by the entrance were grim-faced, their expressions already heavy with what they had witnessed inside. Claudia's stomach tightened. She had been a detective for years, had seen the darkest parts of humanity. But this was different. One of the officers approached, his face pale. "You'll want to prepare yourself before you go in," he warned quietly. "It's bad." Claudia simply nodded. She had already steeled herself for what awaited. The stench hit her first. A heavy, cloying wave of rot and iron filled her nostrils, making her throat tighten. She swallowed against the rising bile and forced herself forward. The kitchen was the first thing she saw. It looked like any other modest rural kitchen, except for the blood. It stained the wooden floor in wide, uneven smears, dulling to a brownish rust where it had dried. On the counter, knives were laid out in meticulous rows, gleaming under the dim overhead light. The cutting board was still slick with grease and congealed fat. Claudia's eyes fell on the dining table. The scene was disturbingly domestic. A half-eaten meal still sat on the plate. The candle's wax dripped onto the white lace tablecloth. Flies hovered around the leftovers, drawn to the sickly sweet scent of cooked meat. She knew, instinctively, what she was looking at, but her mind refused to accept it. She turned away, stomach twisting, and moved toward the adjoining room. The floorboards creaked under her boots as she entered what appeared to be the living room. The furniture was sparse, just a faded couch and a few rickety chairs. But it wasn't the furniture that drew her eye. It was the chair in the corner, the reclining chair. Its fabric was soaked with blood. Detective Berger crouched beside it, lifting a blanket with gloved fingers. His face was stony, but Claudia caught the slight tension in his jaw, a rare tell of disgust. "There's more in the basement," he said quietly. The wooden door leading to the basement creaked as Claudia pushed it open. The stairs were narrow and steep, descending into darkness. She pulled a flashlight from her belt and switched it on, the beam cutting through the gloom. The basement smelled worse than the kitchen, a suffocating mix of rot, dampness, and old copper. Her flashlight illuminated a metal table against the far wall, stained with dried blood. The chains and leather straps affixed to it told her everything she needed to know. A small tray of surgical instruments sat nearby, carefully cleaned and arranged, as though the killer had taken pride in his work. To the left of the table, a large freezer hummed softly. Its lid was slightly ajar. Claudia's throat tightened as she crossed the room. Her gloved hand hesitated over the lid for only a moment before she lifted it. The cold, pale hand of Markus Brandes stared back at her. His eyes were wide open, frozen in a permanent expression of shock. His severed limbs were neatly stacked, wrapped in butcher paper, and labeled with handwritten notes. The precision of the cuts was chilling. Each portion was measured, weighed, and categorized. Claudia's breath caught in her throat. For several seconds, she simply stared. The human mind wasn't designed to process such depravity. She felt a hollow numbness settle over her. "Jesus Christ," Berger muttered from behind her, his voice barely audible. Claudia let the freezer lid fall shut with a dull thunk. She turned away and stared at the stone wall, feeling her own heartbeat thunder in her ears. She needed a moment to push the horror aside, to let it slip into the corner of her mind where she stored all the other monsters she had hunted. Back at the station, Claudia sat at her desk, scrolling through the case files. The evidence collected from the farmhouse painted a clear and harrowing picture. Armin Meiwes had meticulously documented the entire ordeal. Every interaction, every message exchanged with Markus had been saved. The police's forensic team found the videos Meiwes had filmed, the ones showing every excruciating detail of Markus's final moments. They were stored in encrypted files on Meiwes' computer, along with the Cannibal Cafe forum logs. The username, Frankie, left a chilling digital trail. The forum logs revealed that Meiwes had been active in the Darkweb community for years. His posts were calm, methodical, and hauntingly polite. In the threads, he exchanged recipes, preparation tips, and detailed descriptions of the acts he longed to commit. And then there were the emails with Markus. Claudia read through them with a mix of morbid fascination and disbelief. The emails were filled with pleasantries and detailed negotiations, both men treating the arrangement as though it were a perfectly legal transaction. In one email, Markus wrote, "I am honored that you chose me. I want you to savor it, to enjoy every part of me." Claudia stared at the screen, unable to comprehend the level of detachment in the words. She rubbed her temples and closed her eyes. The digital footprints were all there, the evidence painstakingly catalogued and irrefutable. Meiwes had filmed it all, the digital confession preserved in cold, unflinching detail. It didn't take long to find him. Claudia and her team stormed the farmhouse in the early morning hours. Meiwes opened the door without resistance. His face was calm, his eyes empty of fear or remorse. He greeted them politely, as though they were guests arriving for afternoon tea. When Claudia snapped the cuffs onto his wrists, he didn't flinch. Inside the farmhouse, the stove was still warm. On the counter, plates were stacked neatly. The freezer was filled with neatly packaged meat, some pieces still thawing from the previous evening's meal. And on the table, next to the half-eaten portion, was a handwritten note from Meiwes. "I am sorry you had to see this. It was beautiful. It was perfect." Back at the station, Claudia sat in the evidence room. She stared at the table before her, where the packaged remains of Markus Brandes lay catalogued and tagged. In the dim light, she let out a slow breath. The weight of the case was suffocating, but she knew it wasn't over. The trial would come. The footage would be shown in court, the media would descend, and somewhere, in the darkest corners of the web, there were others like Meiwes, watching, waiting, hungry. The courtroom was packed. The dull hum of whispered conversations echoed against the wooden paneling, creating an eerie undercurrent of anticipation. Journalists jostled for position in the gallery, their cameras trained on the man seated at the defendant's table. Armin Meiwes. He sat with his hands folded neatly in his lap, his face devoid of emotion. He did not fidget or glance toward the cameras. He simply stared ahead, calm and still, as though the chaos surrounding him were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Beside him, his defense attorney, Günther Halldorf, sifted through a stack of notes. The prosecutor, Miriam Koch, sat opposite, her face hard and impassive. She had handled her share of grisly cases, but nothing like this. Nothing could have prepared her for the Cannibal of Rotenburg. As the judge entered the courtroom, the murmuring stilled. Everyone rose. The trial was about to begin. The prosecution opened with stark and unflinching detail. Miriam Koch strode to the center of the courtroom, her heels clicking sharply against the stone floor. She turned to face the jury, holding their gaze as she spoke. "This case is unlike anything you have ever seen," she began, her voice measured but heavy with restrained anger. What happened at Armin Meiwes' farmhouse was not consensual euthanasia. It was not mercy. It was murder, carefully planned and executed with horrific precision. She projected images onto a large screen, a haunting slideshow of evidence. The still photos captured the full horror. The blood-soaked chair, the freezer filled with meticulously labeled portions, and the dining table where Meiwes had savored his victim. Gasps echoed through the gallery as the photos flickered by. Some of the jurors paled. Miriam moved to the witness stand, where Detective Claudia Reinhold sat, hands clasped in her lap. Her expression was stony, but the faint shadows beneath her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. "Detective Reinhold, please describe what you found in the basement." Claudia's voice was steady, clinical, as she recounted the scene. She described the bloodstains, the chilling freezer discovery, and the video footage recovered from Meiwes' hard drive. Her voice faltered slightly as she described Markus Brandes' remains, the meat packaged like ordinary cuts of beef. "Did the defendant express any remorse when you arrested him?" Miriam asked. Claudia's eyes hardened. He was disturbingly polite. He thanked us for coming." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Meiwes' calm demeanor, so at odds with the gruesome crime, unsettled even the most hardened observers. When it was Günther Halldorf's turn, he approached the jury with slow, deliberate steps. He adjusted his tie and took a breath, his voice low and measured. What happened between Armin Meiwes and Markus Brandes, he began, was an act of consensual euthanasia. Brandes was a willing participant. He sought this. He begged for it. Halldorf projected the emails and forum messages onto the screen. The jury read Markus's words, his requests to be consumed, his eagerness to become part of another human being. The defense attorney's voice softened as he read Markus's plea aloud. I want you to savor every part of me. The gallery was silent. The weight of the words hung in the air. Halldorf then played portions of the video Meiwes had recorded. The footage, carefully selected to exclude the most graphic acts, showed Markus willingly stripping down, shaking Meiwes' hand, and offering his consent. The defense rested their argument on this chilling documentation. Markus Brandes was not a victim in the conventional sense, Halldorf concluded. He wanted this. The law allows individuals to consent to assisted death in certain cases. Why should this be any different? The prosecution countered by showing the full, unedited video to the court. The jury was sequestered for the viewing as the content was deemed too disturbing for public display. In the dimmed courtroom, the jurors watched in horrified silence as the events unfolded. Markus's pleading eyes, the visible pain on his face, and the chilling detachment with which Meiwes performed the act. The casualness with which he prepared the meal afterward made several jurors visibly recoil. By the end of the footage, some of the jurors were wiping their eyes. Others sat in stunned silence. After weeks of harrowing testimony, closing arguments were made. Miriam Koch, her voice unwavering, addressed the jury with finality. Consent does not justify cannibalism. Consent does not erase murder. When the jury filed back into the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Meiwes sat still, hands folded, showing no sign of emotion. The foreman stood and delivered the verdict. Guilty of manslaughter. Gasps filled the room. The prosecution's shoulders sagged, visibly disheartened by the reduced charge. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the court had ruled that Meiwes' claim of consent had complicated the charge. The jury rejected the murder conviction, citing the victim's willing participation as mitigating circumstances. Meiwes was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison, but the story did not end there. The prosecution appealed the verdict, arguing that Markus's consent did not diminish the fact that he had been brutally killed and dismembered. In 2006, the case was retried. The appellate court overturned the original verdict, ruling that Meiwes was guilty of murder. The new sentence was life imprisonment, ensuring he would never taste freedom again. Meiwes sat silently as the new sentence was read. He neither flinched nor reacted. The Cannibal Cafe case became an international sensation. The Darkweb forum was shut down, but its legacy endured. The trial sparked a worldwide debate on consent, legality, and morality. Documentaries, books, and films explored the case, but none could capture the true horror of what had transpired. From his prison cell, Meiwes gave several interviews. He spoke calmly of his crime, describing the experience as spiritual and beautiful. He even expressed regret, not for the murder, but for the suffering he caused Markus during the act. I should have given him more sedatives, he said once, his voice flat. I regret that he felt pain. Behind bars, Meiwes became a vegetarian, rejecting meat altogether. But no amount of self-imposed abstinence could erase the horror of what he had done. The Cannibal of Rotenburg was now a cautionary legend, a chilling reminder of the dark corners of human desire and the fragility of morality in the face of unspeakable horrors.